Hello, everyone. We're going to read from The Quest for Justice, Modern Illustrations of the Mahabharata.
We're on... Well, they don't really have numbered chapters, but this is the second chapter.
This is the second chapter. Chapter, what's the title?
Ambha, the Lady Scorned.
Okay. Cool.
So the first one was...
The Terrible Vow.
The Terrible Vow. So... Devavrata, Bhishma, or the name of Bhishma before he earned that title, had renounced his claim to the Kuru kingdom, taken a lifelong vow of celibacy, and received the name Bhishma for his terrible vow. Satyavati's father had finally approved the marriage, and she and King Shantanu soon tied the knot. After a while, and this is where we pick things up today, they had two sons, Chitrangada for their firstborn, and Vichitravirya. While all of these events were taking place in and around the Kuru capital, the Asuras, remember them, the bad guys, had been infiltrating the earth in greater and greater numbers, and it was only because of Shantanu's powerful presence that they were still unable to act. The king had extraordinary influence, and so, in a sense, the world was still relatively safe. Of course, time catches up with even the greatest kings, and an aging Shantanu eventually retires, entering the forest, and passes away. After the death of the king, his eldest son, Chitrangada, inherits the Kuru throne, but meets an untimely death at the hands of a Gandharva. If you know your Lord of the Rings, Gandharvas are something like the elves of that story. This liminal species that tends to come in and out of earthly affairs, raising frequent tensions between themselves and human beings. In the case of Chitrangada, he is challenged by a powerful Gandharva who also happens to be named Chitrangada. Basically, the Gandharva tells the Kuru king that he'd better change his name or else.
Good lord.
And then in parentheses it says, it was like, this town ain't big enough for two Chitrangadas. I guess he had a little too much Gandharva testosterone or something. Of course, the Kuru king was himself a proud young warrior who obviously had no intention of yielding to such an absurd demand. So the two Chitrangadas do battle, fighting for a very long time. In the end, the Gandharva makes use of a supernatural weapon to kill the king, which of course is a disaster not only for Satyavati but for the entire Kuru kingdom. The only remaining heir is the younger brother, who next assumes the throne. But Vichitravirya is still only a boy, unable to govern on his own, so Bhishma is asked to serve as regent with Vichitravirya as his ward. Okay, so they've obviously trusted him that he wasn't going to do anything, and he's managing the kingdom till he comes of age. All monarchies require the reigning king to produce a male heir, and the ancient Kuru kingdom was no different. Therefore, as soon as Vichitravirya came of age, he was naturally called upon to marry, produce children, and keep the dynasty going. Now Bhishma had heard that the king of Kashi had three beautiful daughters named Ambha, Ambika, and Ambalika, which in Sanskrit means Ambha, little Ambha, and little bitty Ambha. I mentioned, didn't I, that Sanskrit can sometimes make you laugh. In Spanish, by the way, their names would be Ambha, Ambita, and Ambitita. Bhishma also had heard that these princesses were just about to have their Swayamvara ceremony, a prevalent ceremony among this ancient culture's Kshatriya, or warrior class. Swayamvara literally means personal choice. Swayam, personal, and Vara, choice, and this is how it works. The princess, in consultation with her father, would design a particular challenge, some difficult feat of valor or weapons competition. They would then set a time and place and spread the word to all of the qualified princes of the world. On the day of the challenge, the princes would come from all directions, and the one that outdid the rest would win the maiden's hand. Generally, of course, the princess and her father would not exactly rig, but very much tilt the outcome by creating a task that favored the prince they wanted to win. The victorious prince would then be garlanded by the princess, indicating that she would give her heart to him. Now for Ambha, Ambika, and Ambalika, their father had arranged a major event, a triple Swayamvara, and many princes and even kings traveled to Kashi to compete, with the exception of Vichitravirya, because he was too young. Being the Kuru king, the leading monarchs of the realms, Vichitravirya certainly was expected to compete in the Swayamvara. Yet, at the insistence of both Bhishma and Satyavati, the still young king remained at home, and Bhishma went in his place, pledging to bring the girls back to him. But why this decision? Perhaps it was because Bhishma had become extremely protective of Vichitravirya, having experienced the untimely death of Chitrangada. Because oftentimes at these Swayamvaras, someone's ego would get crushed, and now there would be like a pitched battle. They're like, "Hey, right. No!"
So it's not all uncommon for people's armies to then march the gates to try to
yeah, they feel scorned, and they're like, "Oh, hell no!" Yeah. So he didn't want the only other heir to die.
It's not a risk he can take.
Yeah. Certainly, he would have been aware of the dire consequences should this last remaining heir be killed. With both Chitrangada and Vichitravirya dead, there would be no Kuru king. And Vyasadeva also said, we didn't get to that part yet. And so Bhishma personally went to compete, leaving his young stepbrother safely at home. One important note, the Kuru king was considered the leading monarch, or emperor, but not in the way emperor was understood in the later Roman Empire, where there is one person on top who governs all. The ancient Vedic model was more like the European model at the time of the Magna Carta, where the leading monarch was known in Latin as primus inter pares, which translates as first among equals. Okay. So he was basically they would kind of acknowledge, like, he's the most pious king. He is, like, the role model that we should all be striving for. That was the emperor role.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no record in any Vedic text of an emperor interfering with or taking charge of the internal affairs of any other kingdom. Instead, the Kuru monarch would lead an alliance of kings that would provide for the security of everyone. In return, the other kingdoms would offer some form of tribute to this leading king. The political history of these ancient cultures is another fascinating topic, but for now, we'd better rejoin Bhishma on his way to the Swayamvara. What's interesting here is that when Bhishma rode into the arena representing the imperial crown, it wasn't like one of those typical Hollywood movies about Rome, where the emperor rides in on his chariot bearing the Roman eagle, and all others bow and scrape while he does or takes what he likes. Even though Bhishma was the regent of the Kuru Empire, he still had to compete like everyone else. In fact, when Bhishma showed up, there was quite a bit of murmuring from the crowd, remembering his terrible vow. They turned to each other and said something like, "What in the world is Bhishma, of all people, doing at a Swayamvara?" And as one might expect, there were more than a few chuckles and unkind jests going around at Bhishma's expense. Let's face it, here was this person who had become famous throughout the world for his vow of lifelong celibacy, and then he shows up at a wedding competition. What's that about? So there was all this joking and many sarcastic remarks. Bhishma, however, being the most powerful warrior in the world, would soon be laughing last. Without waiting to compete in the contest or asking anyone's permission, Bhishma simply thundered up to the three girls, swooped them into his arms, placed them in his chariot, stunning the entire crowd. He then turned to all the princes and said, "I've just taken these 3 prizes by force. Now you can destroy me or be destroyed as you like. I'm ready to fight." And with that, Bhishma sped away. Damn! Of course, all the fierce, young, out-of-control warriors went into hyperdrive, taking up their weapons. They began attacking Bhishma with all their might. And Bhishma, who Ganga had endowed with special training and powers, remember he grew up on the heavenly planets, was thinking, oh, this is going to be fun. Then, without even breaking a sweat, he easily defeated all comers, with the exception of one. It was Shalva, who fought ferociously, presenting Bhishma with his most sporting challenge. In the end, of course, Shalva was defeated as well. Krishna later on kills Shalva. Yeah. It was a humiliating public thrashing for these proud Kshatriya warriors, after which Bhishma rode to Hastinapur with the maidens in tow. I always wondered what happened to those 3 girls during that fight. Apparently they were in the chariot with Bhishma, but the text doesn't mention what they were doing. I guess they just had to keep ducking. In any case, somehow or other, the girls survived without getting their heads lopped off, and Bhishma brought them back to Hastinapur. Now, in general, the opportunity to marry into the Kuru dynasty, the seat of world power at that time, would have been extremely prestigious for any princess, almost like a dream come true. But on the way back, the oldest girl, Ambha, told Bhishma of a major problem. So it's not like they were forced to marry someone against their will. So here Bhishma did take them against their will. But the Swayamvara, the point was they generally knew...
Yeah, who would probably win.
Okay, I wanted, like, Draupadi wanted to marry Arjuna.
If you wanted to marry, like, a great archer, I was about to say that, you would design archery contests that are gonna help the best archer win.
Of course.
Whereas you wouldn't maybe design a contest involving, cutting down a whole forest worth of trees or something. That's just not what you'd be doing.
So she tells Bhishma of a major problem. She had already given her heart to Shalva, the dude that Bhishma was fighting, or the Kshatriya that had just given Bhishma his greatest challenge.
The dude.
Ambha explained that things were prearranged for Shalva to win that day, and all was going well until Bhishma ruined everything. What will you do now, she asked, since I've already given my heart to another king? Soon they reached the palace, and Bhishma immediately went to Vichitravirya to discuss the matter of Ambha. They reasoned that because Ambha had already given her heart to Shalva, and he had given his to her, the best thing would be to simply send her back. So it's not like they were...
Yeah. They
he
decided,
was going to respect her. Okay, oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Might should have asked that right before he swooped up.
I know.
Hey.
By the by, who were you wanting to marry? Ambika and Ambalika were different matter. With no prior commitments, they were delighted to marry into the world's greatest dynasty. For them, it was not a problem at all. After Ambha had rested and refreshed herself for a couple of days, Bhishma arranged for a proper escort to Shalva's kingdom. Ambha set out with a happy heart and high hopes for the future. And here begins one of the great yet tragic stories of the Mahabharata. When Ambha reaches the palace, she can't wait to see Shalva. The last time he saw her, Ambha and her sisters had been taken by Bhishma, who drove off after humiliating all the princes. But now things have changed. Ambha is free. She has renounced the queenship of the greatest dynasty on earth, all for the love of Shalva. In all innocence, with a very pure heart, Ambha goes to tell Shalva the good news, but their so-called reunion is not to be, and that is putting it mildly. It is almost as if Ambha has become a total stranger. Not the first time in history that a girl discovers too late that her boyfriend's a jerk. To be fair, Shalva had been publicly humiliated by Bhishma, who had forcibly taken Ambha for himself, or Vichitravirya. For Shalva, taking Ambha back after Bhishma had sent her away was like taking Bhishma's remnants, his discarded leftovers, in charity. So even though Bhishma had the honor, obviously, of not touching her, he's probably like thinking, I'm not going to take the sloppy...
Yes, he doesn't know for sure what happened. Yeah. He just has to...
And not to mention, it's kind of like, it hurts his ego, ouch.
It's more about his ego. Yeah. And that reason gives him an excuse, like an out, to kind of be like, well, I can't know for sure, so... Yeah.
Brahmanas could receive a charity, but warriors were forbidden. That was their culture. To take Ambha back is more than Shalva can bear. It is almost worse than death. His rejection is firm and harsh. There would be no reunion, nor even an exchange of words. He wants absolutely nothing to do with her. Finito.
He probably also feels that, like, if he's married to this woman and he goes around and visits other kingdoms, everybody that sees this woman are going to be reminded that he was defeated and that Bhishma was nice enough to give her back.
Yeah, exactly.
So for him, he's like, I'm not living like that. I'm not going to keep going to these places and keep being seen as this person who just, like, he feels like he'll be unkshatriya-like if he accepts. He could have talked to her maybe and heard her out, and Bhishma is known for keeping his vows, so if he heard that Bhishma had, there could have been maybe more
the bottom line really is Shalva was a very demoniac person, which is ultimately why Krishna ended up separating his head from his body. Which is a shame, because now, and because of the way the Vedic, the culture was at that time, it's not like she can now go to anybody else and say, hey, I'm here to be married.
Yeah, now she's kind of like in
she's
this limbo.
Screwed. She's stuck in limbo. Yeah, she's really going to be pretty pissed at Bhishma.
A quick conversation could have helped a lot.
He's
scooping him up. He could have been like, hey, do you want to come?
Call in the relationship counselors.
No, I'm good. I want to go with him. Okay, I'm going to leave you and take your sisters. Like, he could have had that conversation on the chariot or something.
But then at the same time, Bhishma's ego probably got in the way there. Like,
he was
what am I
going
to do? Come up and only scoop up 2 of them, but leave 1? Because, he was probably like, it was
he was
ego
just doing
all
his
around.
duty. Yeah.
there was another thing at play here as well. People of those times had a very strict moral code, which sometimes led to unreasonable moral choices and very bad consequences, as we'll soon see. In Amba's case, according to the Dharma Shastra, the fact that she had spent a few unescorted days and nights at the Kuru Palace, another man's home, basically took her off the marriage market. But good moral judgment also requires the ability to distinguish between rule and exception, something that Shalva sorely lacked, because he didn't actually...
Yeah.
He was using the thing, using
as an
excuse. He wasn't actually being true to Dharma. When the Kurus decided to deliver Amba to Shalva, she didn't go at once. It had been a long, grueling trip from Kashi, so Amba was allowed to rest for a few days at the Kuru Palace, which is all that she did. But to Shalva, who is a bit of a blunt instrument, the fact that Amba had spent even one unchaperoned night in another king's palace was enough. This, coupled with his public thrashing and loss of face, disqualified Amba for all time. Who are you? I don't even know you. What are you doing here? Are you trying to rub salt in my wound? And Amba kept pleading, you don't understand. I did this for you. Oof. And if I had to guess, I'd say that for Shalva, it was more about pride than morality. Like I said, he really was the kind of a royal jerk. His pride was more important than anything, including Amba's love. So he just turned his back and turned her out. To really get a feel for the heart-wrenching nature of this drama, it is important to understand that Amba had been raised from birth as an honored princess. She had the perfect life. Nothing ever went wrong. Then at her Swayamvara, the happiest moment of her life, when she's just about to choose her husband and become a queen, everything suddenly goes wrong and keeps on going wrong after that. Damn. Amba made her way back to the Kuru kingdom and told Bhishma everything. Now there is no alternative, she said. I must marry Vichitravirya. The light was dawning that her options were rapidly shrinking, but Bhishma's response was as shocking as Shalva's. I'm sorry for what happened to you, but you can no longer marry Vichitravirya. You shouldn't have spent the night in Shalva's house.
Oh my god. Come on, man. You're the whole reason she's in this mess.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But see, now also, people would have talked about the emperor, saying he sent her away, she went to his house, came back. She was actually in love with him, so there's going to be even more question about what really went on there. And then, not that it's right, it just...
Yeah. This is
he's also kind of using it as an excuse, too, but it's like...
This whole business of...
man.
Yeah, using Dharma as the excuse to duck out of things.
Well, really, this is where Bhishma would say, this is destiny.
Yeah.
Like, this was unavoidable. I mean, you could say that, yeah, well, if you go back in time, but just the way the situation played out, because Amba becomes a very, key. She's a very key character to the story. So it really none of the Mahabharata would have happened if it wasn't for this. Sometimes in popular Hinduism, it is thought that Amba's anger stemmed from Bhishma's refusing to marry her due to his vow, because she did say, well, fine, then how about you marry me? And he was like, I took a vow.
Probably because it's like, hey, you're the one that stole me, so how about you take responsibility and you marry me?
But what really enraged Amba and led to Bhishma's death was his unjust conclusion that she was no longer fit to marry Vichitravirya. Because she's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything over there.
Just like I didn't
You sent me back. I didn't do
just
anything
like I didn't do anything here before I went. So
she's like, wow, Bhishma, you're being a hypocrite. And
yeah.
So you have this tragic situation of a princess...
He expected Shalva. He sent her thinking that Shalva would accept her, but the same thing had happened when she came back that he wouldn't accept her based on. So it's kind of like, well, you maybe should have just known that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Give me a heads up.
So you have this tragic situation of a princess who is truthful, virtuous, and impeccable in her conduct. To Bhishma's credit, he could have thought, hey man, Shalva was a pretty legit warrior. He must be upholding Dharma. If I send her to him, he should... according to Dharma, because one of the Dharmas, as if you read later in the Mahabharata, as a warrior or a king, if a woman approaches you asking for protection, it is your Dharma to not refuse. You cannot refuse them protection.
Interesting.
So that's why one of Arjuna's wives that he marries, she does that. She comes forward to him, basically kind of like kidnaps him and is like, you're going to marry me, and otherwise I'm going to throw myself in the fire, because I can't live without you. And she's like, if you say no, you're putting me in danger because I'm going to kill myself. obviously there's some like
that's
some issues going on there, but Arjuna's like, yo, okay, all right. Yeah. And he does it because, you know, he says in there, like, okay, it's my duty as a warrior, you know, to give you offer protection. So,
right.
Yeah. So you have this tragic situation of a princess who is truthful, virtuous, and impeccable in her conduct, who acted out of love, and even from a moral point of view, was completely pure and faultless. Yet she goes from one powerful warrior to the other, being disbelieved and rejected at every turn. To spice things up a bit, some versions of the Mahabharata depict Ambha shuttling back and forth between Bhishma and Shalva many times, pleading and being rejected again and again. But given the character of this young princess, I don't think that would have happened. It seems that at a certain point in its retelling, the story of Ambha, already a tragedy, became something of a farce. The actual story is basically that Shalva rejected her, then Bhishma rejected her, and her whole life collapsed overnight. Why? Because even though she was telling the truth and her virtue remained intact, neither Bhishma nor Shalva would give her the benefit of the doubt. Ambha was now damaged goods, and no Kshatriya would have her. That's messed up, man. This is one of the most powerful and moving stories of the Mahabharata. Eventually, all of Ambha's heartbreak, shock, and sorrow gives way to a terrible burning rage over what these Kshatriyas had done to her. A rage that would ultimately cost both Shalva and Bhishma their lives. I mean, at the end of the day, too, if she would have actually had a firm grasp on which she was raised as a princess, they're taught the Vedic teaching. You know, obviously everyone in this situation had their part to play.
Yeah. She
could have said, you know what, this was the good Lord's will, and I'm going to just accept it.
Right.
And she not hold a grudge and just been forgiving, but she didn't.
Yeah.
So then again, like, you know,
she's
totally justified, but that's also
she also
like
chose this dude, even though she had been taken by Bhishma. She could have just accepted that she was now marrying what's his name?
Vichitravirya. Yeah.
Vichitravirya, and but she chose to go back to this guy, and that's kind of I mean, if you're in love with somebody, you'd hope that you know them better and to know well enough that he's probably gonna be too prideful about this. Maybe send a letter first, see what's up. I don't know, but. Leaving, like, I mean, not to say, like, of course, like you said, she's very justified in a lot of ways, but I think that she also, like you said, made some choices, and it's part of it. It's just her life, it's her destiny kind of thing. It's part of what happened here. She should have realized the guy she was with too much of a bonehead to accept her after that.
I mean, it's not like also back in the day that they really got like
strong language, but
oh yeah, we've been living with each other for 10 years, and I think now we're ready to get married. Like, nah, man, there was no dating in their culture as we do today to get to know the person. So it was kind of more like, oftentimes, at least from my understanding of what I mean, I've read the Mahabharata many times, it's more of like, I'm very attracted to this person's reputation. Everyone speaks highly about them. Yeah. Like Rukmini with Krishna. She had never seen Krishna. They do
matches based on the stories of the personality. Like, oh, this would be a good match. It was about the power, the merging of the families, but also about like, this would be a good family for us to merge into because of that reputation. And I think that would be good for my son or my daughter to, like, they would get along kind of thing. It wasn't just about that, because I think they would often choose appropriate. Yeah. Like you said, the Swayamvaras, they would design them for a certain one to win kind of. Yeah.
For sure.
How many pages are you? Where are we at here?
There's like 3 more. I was going to just read this, and then you want to read the other one?
Okay.
What time are we at? 24 minutes? Alright, I'll go through it. But that's a long way off. At this point, Ambha is receiving the standard advice from everyone. Go back to your father, go back to your family, because there's really nothing left for you to do. To understand what happens next, we must remember that Ambha is a royal princess, with the blood of a female warrior flowing in her veins. And given that the conservative nature of this ancient religious civilization, what Ambha decides to do is truly amazing and unique. This is a civilization in which women are meant to be under a man's protection at every stage of life. But Ambha goes an entirely different direction, the path almost never traveled by a woman of those times. Rather than going back to her family, she will strike out on her own, with only one purpose in mind: revenge. Alone, Ambha enters the forest, seeking her grandfather, who has retired and become a part of a community of sages and ascetics. When they hear her story, these austere men feel so badly for Ambha that they actually begin to weep out of pity. And her grandfather, crying, takes her on his lap. Still, at the end of the day, these sages echo the advice of the others. What else can you do? Where else can you go? You must go back to your family. It wasn't like in modern times, where a scorned girl can just say, the heck with it, I'll move to New York, manage a hedge fund, and get a new boyfriend. It wasn't that kind of culture at all. But Ambha would not hear of it. She will have her revenge at all costs, regardless of what it takes. She sits down and starts to reflect on all that has happened, thinking about callous Bhishma and pitiless Shalva. And while she's extremely angry at both, she settles on Bhishma as the primary architect of her misfortune. Sure, Shalva turned out to be a real blankety blank, but Bhishma was the one she really wanted to suffer. But to take on someone like Bhishma, you need a lot of empowerment, and to obtain that power, Ambha remains deep within the forest by the bank of the Jamuna, and begins practicing a rigorous, almost frightening form of tapasya, thinking only of her revenge. Within this yoga culture, there's always the idea that tapasya, austerity, self-abnegation, self-denial leads to power. In the case of Ambha, even the other yogis are frightened by her determination. Finally, Lord Shiva himself comes before Ambha and grants her the power to kill Bhishma. Having achieved all that she requires, Ambha is ready for the next life. She throws herself into the sacrificial fire, crying, Bhishma Vadayati, to the killing of Bhishma. Oh. Damn, what a freaking baller, man. She's like, all right, I got what I wanted. No point sticking around. Peace out. Yeesh. Damn. As Ambha, she is limited. Her ultimate revenge requires a new body. There's obviously far more to be told about Ambha, and we'll learn all about her new birth and ultimate revenge in the days to come. And because she was such a powerful yogini at the time of death, she was able, through the practice of yoga, to dictate that I'm leaving my body in the right state of mind. Here. I know I'm going to be getting another human life because of the actions that I've just done.
Right.
And therefore, boom, she was able to, carry on to the next life through the power of, because she was such a potent yoga. Yeah. But rather than, she had to die in order to come back. If she would have just focused on loving God, she could have died and then not had to come back at all. So that's really, it's like, okay, well, how far do you want to take it?
How much misery do you want to undergo?
There's obviously far more to be told about Ambha, and we'll learn about her new birth and ultimate revenge in the days to come. Meanwhile, back at the Kuru ranch, another sad story unfolds. Vichitravirya marries Ambha's younger sisters, Ambika and Ambalika. As a youth, Vichitravirya was totally dedicated to Dharma, but after his marriage, something changed. Now all he seemed to care about is prolonging his honeymoon. Basically, he goes into the royal bedchambers and never comes out, at least for some time. The text explains that Vichitravirya so overindulged in personal gratification that he contracted the disease yakshma, known in English as consumption and later as tuberculosis. The disease eventually kills the young king, who leaves behind 2 beautiful widows but not a single heir. This, of course, throws the Kuru dynasty into a full-blown crisis. The Kuru dynasty, as described in the Mahabharata, had existed for century upon century, always upholding Dharma, always giving shelter to all living beings, and although people were not aware of it at the time, it was the Kuru dynasty that would protect the world from the attempted takeover of the Asura insurrectionists. But suddenly everything is thrown into jeopardy. Vichitravirya, the last legitimate Kuru king, dies without leaving an heir. Bhishma, of course, is still there, but his renunciation of the throne and his vow of celibacy makes it impossible for him to rule or to produce heirs. The crisis was unprecedented. And again, Bhishma even, according to Dharma, he should have been able to recognize that me sacrificing my vow for the betterment of the kingdom, because if we don't have a good king,
his
the
pride,
people are
his
going to be
pride
his
is
pride
does not override everyone's safety,
Yeah.
and like the world.
His duty really is, and that's what his mom tries to, or Satyavati tries to tell him, like, yo, you need to, you need to get your priorities in order. One more page. Satyavati was younger than Bhishma, who had actually brought her back to his father. Still, being the widow of Shantanu, she was by law the queen mother, and by marriage Bhishma's stepmother. She was now an integral part of the historic Kuru dynasty, and with the kingdom on the verge of collapse, she felt the burden of doing something about it. In her legitimate role as a stepmother, she had a private talk with Bhishma about his vow. She said that while she admired his resolve, this was a time to think first of the dynasty and the protection of Dharma. Bhishma would have to accept his stepbrother's widow and produce an heir. There was no other way. At this point, Bhishma gives a very famous speech in which he flatly declines this extraordinary opportunity. To sum it up, he basically says, "Let the whole planet explode. Let the universe descend into chaos. I will not break my vow." Ego, man. Yep. Bhishma's reaction is very interesting, since by analyzing the actions of various characters in the Mahabharata, Bhishma, and later Krishna's and others, we can easily discern different moral philosophies. Western philosophers, for example, would identify Bhishma's current moral outlook as act-based, or deontological, ethics, the idea that the act itself is moral or immoral, and that any possible or even probable consequence must be disregarded. It's a very impractical way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
This is a good description of Bhishma's stance. The consequence doesn't matter. I give my word and I'll keep it. That's my morality. And if that causes the ruin of the Kuru dynasty, the destruction of Dharma, the Asura's takeover of the earth, then so be it. It is the act of keeping my vow what matters most. Amazingly, Immanuel Kant actually held this position as well. And see, this also explains why Bhishma supports Duryodhana later, because he's like, well, I vowed to protect the king in Hastinapur, and technically he's the king right now because he did usurp the kingdom, even though it was kind of cheap and underhanded. It's a technicality, therefore I still have to serve him. But what he should have done is said, dude, you're sinful, you're being underhanded. Anyway. But Bhishma is considered, he's one of the 12 Mahajans, like Prahlad, Dhruva, like he's a pure devotee of the Lord. And this pastime, the reason why he chose to act in this way is to set an example. Like, okay, you may be the most pious person, you even may be,
to show there's still a flaw.
but there's still a flaw there. If you're not upholding Dharma truly and doing what's right, then no matter how powerful you are going to be defeated. Fortunately, as we will see later in the Mahabharata, Krishna's moral teaching is far removed from Bhishma's act-based perspective. In fact, it is Krishna's strong view that an act's consequences are very much a part of the act. Well, that's how karma works. You can't just think, I do this, and it's, the immediate result is the only result that is produced. Like, no, there's all kinds of ramifications to every decision you make. In other words, when you do something and you know that there will be certain consequences, the moral quality of your decision or conduct is based not on the act alone, but rather on the act and its consequences. Actually, much later in the Mahabharata, Krishna will tell grandfather Bhishma the story of a sage who was proud of always telling the truth. Anyone asking him a question would always receive an entirely honest answer. One time, a group of innocent people ran in terror through his ashram and hid in the forest, being pursued from town by murderous thieves. Knowing of the sage's reputation for honesty, the thieves went to him and asked if he knew where these innocents were hiding. Yes, he replied. Well, where are they? They're right over there behind those trees. Thanks to the blind honesty of this sage, the criminals easily found, robbed, and killed their victims. Krishna revealed the sage's fate. Because he had told the truth, he went to hell. Why? He knowingly caused the death of an innocent person. That was the consequence of his so-called act of truth. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna states the certain times when upholding the truth is actually immoral.
Yeah.
And it's when, if you're protecting your own life or the life of someone innocent, Anyway, last paragraph.
Yeah.
Bhishma will eventually come around and become one of Krishna's greatest devotees, but in terms of this crisis, and Satyavati pressing him to produce an heir for Bhishma, it is the act of keeping his vow that is most important. Nothing else matters. He refuses to marry. He refuses to beget heirs to the Kuru throne. Satyavati is now desperate, seeing no way forward, until Bhishma himself comes up with another solution. And with that cliffhanger, we will end for today. Maybe we could have split it in half. It's fine. I figured, we can blaze through this.
Yeah. Let's just we'll do it by chapter for the podcast. Just
okay.
They can just listen to both chapters since it's a little short.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll just do that. So let's just really quickly restart the audio real fast and then continue on. And I'll do the same thing on that thing. Give us a 60-second break here. I'll just get this.
Oh shit, I guess we should have said something like thanks for listening.
Yeah, I was going to say, I stopped the recording, but this is, I think, still recording. So thank you guys for listening. Sorry about that. We're about to jump into the next chapter, so we'll see you on that one.